Three family members are found murdered inside of a bathtub, and it would take 50 years to finally solve the mystery. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of the Durham family murders. Viewer discretion is advised. Real quick before we get started, of course, hello, my name is Mike. If you're new to the channel, I tell 3 true crime stories a week here on YouTube on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Stop being extravagant. So please subscribe if you're into that kind of thing, and also give this video a like. And then also I tell short form true crime stories over on TikTok, where I'm more known. I have almost 3 million followers over there or so, and I tell one story at least every single day over there. The link to that will be up here at some point in the beginning and the end of the video, and it's also linked in the link tree in the description of this video below, where you will also find my merch store link, where we sell t-shirts and stuff like this. And yeah, we ship all over the world. That's what we do. You're welcome. Okay. You will also find my True Crimerer case list in the link tree. You can scroll through my list of names that I have on there to, eventually cover. And if you don't see a name on there you want me to cover, just email me at makingatruecrimerertwo.com. That is also listed below. And just email me the name of the case, where it happened, when it happened, and I'll add it to the list. I choose cases at random. I close my eyes and I pick a name off the list. And so, just to be fair, so I can't tell you when I'll cover your case, but I will get to it eventually, I promise. Anyway, let's get into today's case. Yeah, okay. I don't really know a whole ton of backstory about the Durham family, but they were originally from the Mount Airy area of North Carolina. The family consisted of 51-year-old Bryce Durham, his 44-year-old wife, Virginia, and the two of them also had 2 children, 18-year-old Bobby and 19-year-old Ginny. Ginny had moved out of the family home. She had gotten married, and so she was living just I think like a mile or less away from the Durham house. So by the time this case occurs, the Durham family is actually living in Boone, North Carolina, I guess, which is in Watauga County in North Carolina. Bryce Durham had purchased a Buick dealership. He was a car salesman. According to some people who lived in the area at the time, typically when someone were to buy like a new business or something in the area, that person would almost immediately become involved in the community. They would just sort of be out and about and mingling, but apparently Bryce and his family just were very reserved. They tend to stay in. They didn't really put themselves in the community even after buying a business out there. They were just a very kind of, not standoffish, but just a private family, if you will. And by the time this case happens, the family hadn't really been there a whole lot of time in order to establish true, genuine connections with people. And that being said, also not developing, any enemies that people were aware of. This takes us to February 3rd, 1972. There is a pretty severe snowstorm happening at this time, and the roads are, basically snowed over. It's extremely cold. And at about 10:30 p.m. that night, Ginny gets a phone call at her trailer from what she thinks is maybe her mom, Virginia. Virginia tells Ginny kind of quietly, "There are men here who have Bobby and Bryce." And then the line immediately goes dead. Ginny at first was like, what? She thought it was potentially like a prank, but she didn't want to take a chance. And so her and her husband were going to get in the car and drive over to, her parents' home. But their car was having issues starting, and so they had a neighbor who just happened to be a private investigator who offered to take them to the house. And so the 3 of them got into the car and they drove up. Now the road was basically pretty snowed over at this point, and their car couldn't make it all the way up, the drive. So Ginny stayed in the car while her husband and this private investigator get out of the car and walk up to the house. The door is unlocked, and so they kind of just walk in and they're calling out for, their names to see if anyone will respond, and they're not getting any responses. But the first thing they notice, and it's really obvious, is the house is in complete in utter disarray. It is ransacked. There is just stuff everywhere. There are things, drawers pulled out, just crap thrown all over the floor. And I'm showing several photos, and this is the actual crime scene. Nothing bloody or gory is shown in these photos, but this is just kind of what the house looked like at the time. And at first glance, it looked like this is someone tried to rob the house. Someone broke in and tried to rob them. But where's the family? And so as Ginny's husband and this private investigator walk down the hallway, they hear what sounds like some pretty loud rushing water, and it's coming from the bathroom. So they open the bathroom door, and it's then that they notice something just awful. There are 3 people lined up and smushed up next to each other, and their heads are all in the bathtub, just full of water. Their lower halves of their bodies are just dangling outside of the bathtub. And it is more than evidence that all 3 people are deceased. And it was immediately confirmed to be the bodies of Bryce, Virginia, and their son Bobby. All 3 had been killed. And so they call the police immediately. The Watauga Sheriff's Department arrives, and once the medical examiner gets the bodies, he says that all 3 victims had what looked like severe rope burns around their necks. But Virginia was the only one who actually died of strangulation from potentially a rope. But I don't think the rope was at the crime scene. Bryce and his son Bobby, they had both been drowned in the bathtub. But they were at one point restricted with rope around their neck. It's possible that the killer or killers had strung a rope around their necks to kind of force them, but also pushing their head underwater. Now, immediately, because of the condition of the house it was just absolute chaos, the investigators immediately thought this was a robbery, and the people were home, and so they had to be killed because they were witnesses, right? They had found a large bag that was literally full of cash, just sitting on a counter. And this was a deposit that was probably supposed to be made maybe the following day or whatever in the upcoming days at a bank. Probably something from the Buick dealership that Bryce brought home. And it wasn't taken. There was none of the money was gone. And even though it looked like the house had been ransacked and things were thrown everywhere, Ginny would basically confirm that there really wasn't anything taken. And so they thought, well, was this really a robbery? Was this a robbery that was interrupted by the family? Well, no, it wasn't interrupted because more evidence at the crime scene would show that the family was home the entire evening. There was a half-eaten baked chicken sitting on the kitchen counter. There was other food items that was just out there kind of fresh and hadn't been eaten yet. The TV was on, and there was beverages on the tables next to the TV. It looked like the family had just eaten some kind of late night dinner or snack, and they were sitting around the TV watching it, while just drinking some beverages. And then somebody came in and did this to them. So the family didn't walk in on a robbery. So then police were like, well, this had to be a staged robbery then. They wanted it to look like a robbery when it wasn't. The community was pretty, rocked by this because this is something that has never really happened before there. And like I said earlier, a lot of the community didn't really know the Durham family super well. It's not like they were recluses or anything. I mean, they were out and about and people knew them. They were very friendly. They were a seemingly happy family. And it's just, they were just quiet, that's all. But nobody could say who on earth would do this? There was no rhyme or reason to it. The Watauga Sheriff's Department said they had suspects over the years, but none of them really developed into actually being close to, being confirmed and saying, okay, we can arrest these people. In terms of physical evidence, it doesn't sound like they had a lot. I mean, this was 1972. This was well before DNA was a thing. And so they did not collect specifically DNA from anything because they didn't know about it. They did collect evidence, and I think down the road they were hoping, as the years go by and cold case teams kind of picked up this case, I think they kept hoping that they would be able to pull DNA off of something as technology advanced, but it doesn't really sound like anything did. There was one cold case team, and this is now in 2006, that was hopeful that there was a piece of evidence that they were hopeful they could get evidence or DNA from, but they noticed that the piece of evidence had been kind of damaged by the elements, and so getting DNA from it was just not probably going to happen. They did have fingerprints, but those fingerprints never matched any of their suspects, any of their persons of interest, and this case just went cold. The case went as cold as that night in February of 1972. As the years go by, as decades go by, there are, detectives retire and move on. There are new people who work on the case, and then they retire or move on to a different department, and then the case just gets passed down and down and down. They never had any luck. This is just one of those creepy, bizarre mysteries. A family was home, enjoying a late night snack or dinner, watching TV together, and then they're just killed in their home. But why were they killed? If this was a staged robbery, why was the Durham family murdered this way? Because that appeared to be the goal of whoever did this, was to kill this family. Not to steal from them, but to murder them. To silence them? But silence them from what? Does this have anything to do with the Buick dealership that he had purchased a couple of years prior? Could be. The police, over the years, looked into Bryce's business dealings, and they determined he never had anything to do with any drug trades or money laundering or anything along those lines. They couldn't find anything that Bryce had been doing anything wrong or illegal that may have led to being involved in some shady dealings with the wrong crowd, which then maybe he did something wrong, and so they took it out on him and his family and killed him. There was, I think, at one point in the investigation, many years down the road, where there was this idea that perhaps another car dealership in the area had hired a hit on Bryce, because maybe Bryce was successful or taking business away from that person, but they couldn't develop any leads from that either. The case was really mainly just full of rumors, of hearsay, of things that may have happened, but no one can prove it. Could it have anything to do with Bobby, the 18-year-old son? Bobby was described as a really quiet kid, but at school, even though he was shy at school, he was still very friendly. People said he was a really well-behaved, good-hearted fella. And they investigated him too, and they couldn't develop any leads from him either. He wasn't being bullied by anyone at school. He didn't get involved in any wrongdoings at school, or because he had just started college. This wasn't like he had a girlfriend and maybe the girlfriend had a boyfriend and they found out and took it out on the family. So it sounds like they investigated every single possible lead they could think of, and they just never came up with anything. By the way, I forgot to mention this earlier, but the family, I guess, or Bobby's car, he had a car that was missing from the property, but it was found a couple of miles away, just like an hour or so later after the murders were discovered. And the car was probably the getaway vehicle for these bad guys. I don't know how they got there because there was no other car there, but they got there somehow, but then they left in Bobby's car. However, the car yielded no evidence. I don't think it had any fingerprints or DNA, nothing. And I think there was even valuables in the car that they could have stolen and sold, but were still in the car. They also had to work under the theory that this wasn't just one person who did this. There's probably no way it could have been one person who did it. This had to have been at least two, if not more. And I think the idea behind that is the fact that 3 people were killed inside of a bathtub, 2 of them were drowned, 1 of them was strangled. How do you contain, if it's just one person doing that, how does one person contain the other 2 as they're drowning one person? They have to be focused on that with probably both of their hands on that person, and so the other 2 might try to run away. So there had to have been at least another person holding the other 2 at gunpoint, or helping drown 2 victims at once, while maybe a third person is holding Virginia and strangling her. Despite the severity of this crime and how it affected the community and all of this, and the investigation never really ever truly got off the ground. I mean, whoever did this clearly knew what they were doing and they were good at it. There was even like a theory, I think, that the Green Berets did this. I mean, they were just like, they had so many insane theories as to what happened, and they had to investigate all of these theories, but, nothing. And so it wouldn't be until about 50 years later when they finally got the information they were looking for. And quite honestly, it seemed to come as a complete and utter shock and surprise. The culprits who did this, the Dixie Mafia from Georgia. I shit you not. A hit was taken out on the Durham family from somebody within the Dixie Mafia in Georgia. Now, who hired that hit still is not known. They are described as a loose confederation of thugs and crooks who committed crimes along the southern part of the United States. They were involved in illegal gambling, strip clubs, that kind of thing. Kind of like your old-timey style, like gangsta vibes. So where did this lead come from? Well, first of all, it came in 2019 from a man named Shane Bert. Shane was the son of a man named Billy Sunday Bert. Shane Bert was actually writing a book at the time about notorious crimes that happened in the area. Shane was close with his dad, but his dad spent a lot of time in prison. And so one day, while visiting his dad in prison, his dad admits that he, along with some other people, went into a home during a snowstorm in 1972 and murdered a family of 3. Specifically even said how they were strangled and drowned. So Shane Bert would go to the Watauga Sheriff's Department in North Carolina and relate all this information. So the Sheriff's Department, along with other investigators, they go and they basically interview as many people as they can connected to these people, connected to the Dixie Mafia back at the time, and they can essentially confirm that this story is true based on all of their witness statements that they have been able to get, now based on some evidence that they had, they could conclude that this individual was telling the truth. And Billy Bert had named his 3 other accomplices. So it was also Bobby Jean Gaddis, Charles David Reed, and Billy Wayne Davis. Shortly after this confession from Billy Bert, he dies. And by the time investigators got all this information and were able to corroborate all of these witness statements and the evidence and all that, 3 of the 4 men had already been dead. The only one alive was Billy Wayne Davis, and he was 81 years old. And he is currently in a Georgia prison. So they interview Davis. He corroborates all of this as well. He basically says, yes, me and these 3 others were responsible for the murders of the Durham family. And he said he was the getaway driver, and he said he never went in the house. It sounds like it's easy for him to say because the other 3 are dead. And so he can put as little blame on himself now at this point as he wants. And they really can't prove that he wasn't the getaway driver and that he wasn't in the house during the murders, but it's really all they can go off of is what he says. He actually said they almost got caught the night of the murders because the car wasn't able to drive anymore because the snow on the road was so bad. They had to abandon the car. And so he said at that point they were very close to being caught. But even Billy Davis, he won't say who hired the hit, but he confirmed that this was a hit from the Dixie Mafia. I don't know if they ever found any connections between Bryce Durham or any of the Durhams to the Dixie Mafia in Georgia. That's what it was. And so it kind of just came as a big, like, what? A surprise, a shock. And he won't reveal who hired it. So it's, you do have the answer, but not the entire answer. You know who did it. You just don't know exactly why. Kind of just super bizarre. I believe Billy Davis, who is 81, is spending the remainder of his life in a prison in Georgia. I don't know if he's being prosecuted for having involvement in these murders, but the Sheriff's Department there in North Carolina have now labeled this case as being closed. Remaining family members of the Durhams have been informed because Ginny, is still alive. They're very grateful for all the work the investigators have done. They're just happy that this case finally got a conclusion. And, it kind of just goes to show that this is a case that gives you a really great example of why you just never, ever, ever give up hope. I mean, this was over 50 years ago. And so even those cases can be solved. I mean, it may not always be with physical evidence. It could be with someone finally coming forward to saying something. And so, you have a bunch of cases out there. I mean, how many cases out there? Lots of them, probably an infinite amount of unsolved cases that people are losing hope will ever be solved. But let this case be an example of there is hope. And, your justice is coming. Your closure is coming, and your answers could be coming. So, just remember that. But in the end, the Durham family, their case is closed and they're laid to rest. But did they get justice? They didn't. Their killers primarily are dead or rotting in a prison cell, but not in a prison cell for their murders. So the reality is the Durham family did not get the justice they rightfully deserved. But that is it for this case. True crime a Rooney Dooney Dingleberry Dongs. Hope you found it interesting. As usual, please subscribe, give this video a like, follow me over on TikTok. I sell merch, also in the link tree in the description of this video below. Recommend a case to my email, also listed below. And what else is there? What else is there to say? Fruit Loops? That's something else I could say. Do you like fruit? I like Fruit Loops. What else can I say? I can say discombobulated. Can you? Anti-disestablishmentarianism. Can you say that? Bet you can't. Loser. I'm just kidding. You're not a loser. What else can I say? Apparently, other than the word goodbye, I can say other things. Miss Frizzle is a terrorist. Frizzle, the school bus lady? She's a terrorist. She wanted to kill those kids. Have you ever eaten wood chips before? Wood chips, like chewed on them like cereal, you poured milk over them? I do. Maybe that's not pertinent information for you guys to know. Oh, look at that. Look at the time. I'm not wearing a watch. Oh, okay. Well, hey, my camera has a fuzzy little hat on. You can't see it because this camera's looking at my camera. It looks like a guy in a snowstorm. He's wearing like a Russian in a snowy snowstorm. I got lights. Lights are up. Oh, the word I'm thinking of is goodbye.